Some of those who attacked the consulate were inspired in part by televised scenes of protesters storming the American embassy in Cairo in rage over an anti-Muslim video running on the internet.
On September 11, 2015, Jacksonville, Florida honored those lost in Benghazi who stood up instead of standing down. The Benghazi tribute was held to honor 4 American heroes that were murdered and 10 Americans who were wounded in the Battle of Benghazi 3 years earlier on September 11, 2012. The solemn memorial service honoring the United States Ambassador to Libya, Mr. Chris Stevens, U.S. Navy veteran SEAL Tyrone Woods, U.S. Navy veteran SEAL Glenn Doherty, and U.S. Navy veteran Sean Smith, who gave their last full measure on 11 September 2012, included military honors, the colors procession, laying on of wreaths for the 4 heroes, and echo taps. Jacksonville came together to honor those who fought valiantly in Benghazi and to get informed on those in our government who have refused to honor their commitment and who refuse to protect Ambassador Chris Stevens and his security staff. Now you can have the opportunity to hear the real story on Benghazi and its impact on our nation from 4 great Americans who know the truth. The first part is retired Admiral Ace Lyons of the Citizen Commission on Benghazi to tell us the truth of what really happened in Benghazi. The second speaker is the distinguished Michael Del Rosso, who tells us the threat. The third speaker is retired Rear Admiral Charles Cubitt, who shares the consequences of what happened in Benghazi. A special question and answer panel discussion is part 4, where these speakers are joined by the knowledgeable Stephanie Jason. Follow along in each part to learn the whole story, the true story. My name is Ryman Shove, and I am the MC for Jacksonville's 2015.
Okay, we're going to have 4 people on our panel. The 4th person here is Ms. Stephanie Jason. If you listen to Anthony Pinoso, Anthony, are you here? If you listen to Anthony Pinoso's American Foreign Policy, you hear Admiral Cubitt has been on that, and so has Stephanie Jason. That's every Saturday, 4 to 5 p.m. Please listen up, learn about American foreign policy with Anthony Pinoso. What did I say? Correction, thank you. That's why on that program I'm just the captain, you're the admiral on that one, right? That's Sunday, Sunday 4 to 5 at the 1600 to 1700 there for military folks. Okay. The 4th person on the panel is Ms. Stephanie Jason. She is international business, does quite a lot of business in Libya. I think you told me you've been there 60 times, right? Libya 60 times. She also knew Ambassador Chris Stevens personally and was with him about 2 months prior to him being unfortunately murdered because our government did not stand up for him. Okay? So let me put on my eyes. I also knew Ambassador Chris Stevens my last 4 years in the Navy. I taught national security strategy and policy at the National War College. He was one of my students. The last time that I saw him was in May of 2012. He had come to D.C. to brief the Secretary of State on some issues with Libya. I met with him at that time. He was telling me the story about how he got into Libya. The last time that I actually got an email from him was in July of 2012. There was an article about him in the Washington Post. I emailed him in Tripoli and said, "Hey, Chris, and I must have trained you well because I see that they're writing about you in the Washington Post." He loved tennis. I said, "So how's things going over there?" And he said, "Well, Robin, I love tennis, but every time these Al-Qaeda guys shell the compound, I have to get off the tennis court. These terrorists are affecting my tennis game. I don't appreciate it." So he had his priorities straight apparently at that time because it was all about tennis. And then unfortunately he was murdered in 2012. Thanks for that. Is that what you wanted to hear? All right. Okay, y'all, Ben Franklin's glasses on here. First question to Admiral Cubitt. Why should Libya be a significant concern to America?
What you're really saying is, what difference at this point does it make? Well, I'll tell you, it makes a big difference. When you look strategically, Libya borders 6 countries in northern Africa, and it can become once again a strategic ally in defeating Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and really in bringing opportunity to other countries. One of the things that Gaddafi was doing was he had his own fund that was supporting development in other African countries. And it was actually working very, very well, and it was being run by some very astute businessmen as well. And so, yes, it does of significant concern to America because on one hand, if we do this right and forcefully and boldly, it can basically put right there, you know, in the heart of Northern Africa, a strategic ally. On the other hand, if we continue to ignore it, we're going to have a failed state similar to Somalia with a 1,700-kilometer border on the Mediterranean, and it's going to be a major threat to Europe, and you're going to see them becoming, I mean, it's a lot nicer in Libya, particularly along the coast, than it is in Somalia or in the mountains of Afghanistan. So it is a significant concern. It's one of many, but it's also one that we as a nation really messed up. And really, if there's a nation that we're responsible for fixing, you know, that's Libya. And I think it can be done fairly easily if we approach it boldly, as I recommended.
Okay, this one's to Admiral Lyons. How come we have never responded to anything, i.e. Benghazi attack, Marine barracks, 1983, Gulf Tanker War, Persian Gulf War, etc.?
Well, that's a very good question. And, you know, I have to say, we've been sabotaged from within. I mentioned when Iran took over our embassy under the Carter administration. And I told you what happened there. And the next time we had an opportunity to change the course of history is when our Marine barracks were bombed in Beirut, October 23rd, 1983. I got to tell you, Casey called me out. I was the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations then, and Casey called me out politely, and he said, if we found out who did it, would I make up the plans to take them out? And I said, absolutely. He said, there's one condition. Whatever we give you, you cannot share with the Joint Staff. The reason? You want to read about it in the Washington Post next edition. And that's absolutely true. But long story short, we found out who it was. It was, they were holed up. It was the Islamic Amal plus the Hezbollah. They were holed up in the Sheikh Abdullah Lebanese Army barracks above Baalbek. They took it over on the 16th of September with the help of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And I can tell you that the orders for that bombing came direct from Tehran through the Iranian ambassador in Damascus. And NSA put the message out on the 27th of September, 1983. And what it said was to the terrorist group, concentrate your attacks on the multinational force, but take a spectacular action against the United States Marines. That came out almost 4 weeks before the attack. I did not see that message until the 25th of October, 2 days after the bombing. I've never gotten a satisfactory answer where it was, what happened to it. But now more to the point. So, when we found out where it was, I couriered the plans to the carriers because I knew the Soviets were reading our comms at that time. I thought the leak was out of NATO when I was in command of the NATO striking fleet and second fleet. And I won't go into those details, but I thought the leak was out of NATO because this is before we knew about Walker, who was selling the Soviets our communications. Good American. Anyway, we had the planes loaded. In the words of the strike group commander, Jerry Tuttle, who used to work for me, this was a chip shot. We would have been in and out in a matter of minutes. We were going to make the Sheikh Abdullah barracks look like a plowed cornfield in Kansas. Amen. The guy who sabotaged, now, I got to tell you this. I had to go down and brief the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Bessie, because Lehman and the CNO were getting all nervous that I was going to carry out a strike without telling anybody. Oh, God forbid. So I went into Bessie. Now you got to put yourselves in the position of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I walk in and I say, we got the group that killed 241 of our finest Marines. And I'm sure every one of your reaction would be, great, go get him. It was almost like he didn't want to hear it. You know. Told me I had to brief the chiefs, so I briefed the chiefs. They all agreed. I briefed Weinberger, went through everything with Weinberger. At the key meeting with Reagan, and at that meeting, I had called out to the 6th Fleet, and I said, load those damn planes, because what we were going to do was we're going to do the strike at first light, because I wanted to give those bastards a sound send-off to Mecca. And at the meeting, Weinberger said, oh, and this is after we briefed him, I think there are Lebanese army troops in those barracks. And the president probably turned to Casey, who had just come back from one of his famous trips, and said, George, what about that? Well, of course, he didn't know diddly squat. So when you read Reagan's diary, it'll say, you know, the intelligence is fuzzy. Go back and sort it out. So they went back next day meeting. No, there are no Lebanese army troops in those barracks. And this time, Weinberger starts waving his arms while I get this from the National Security Advisor, Bud McFarlane, and then George Shultz, the Secretary of State. They said, we're going to lose all our Arab friends if we go ahead with the strike, da-da-da-da-da. He got Reagan confused enough, we never could get the orders to execute the strike and download the planes. You're going to read in Weinberger's book that said, we didn't have good intelligence and we weren't sure where they were. That was pure BS. We had people in there, we had the photographs, we knew exactly who it was, where they came from, and we were going to give them a proper send-off. And to undercut that claim, the French, you recall, lost 55 military personnel. They wanted to do a combined strike with us. Reagan approved the combined strike. I told Tuttle, go share those strike plans with the French. And Reagan approved it. And I'm glad you're all sitting down because Weinberger wouldn't issue the execute order. He should have been fired on the spot. And how did he get out of it? He went over and he used his kitchen cabinet association with Reagan from California. And he told Reagan, oh, we really didn't have to go. The French totally wiped them out. And you'll read that in Reagan's diary. Pure BS. The French dropped two 500-pound bombs and killed the goat. What happened then? We were seen as bowing to the terrorist threat. It became Osama bin Laden's rallying cry. The Americans can't suffer casualties, they will cut and run. And in the eyes of the Middle East, that's exactly what we did. We could have changed the course of history right there. But along with a few other incidents, we failed. And again, it didn't matter, Democrat or Republican administration. And we're living with those consequences today. Because what we've done is we make this terrorist threat look like it's 9 feet tall. I can tell you right now, we can go in and wipe ISIS out in 3 months. Yes. What we got to do, we got to do 300-400 airstrikes a day, and anything that moves, it goes out. And we have to take that General Susan Wright and that other idiot, Valerie Jarrett, and take them out of the equation. Legitimately restrict the rules of engagement, and in 3 months, you'll have a different situation in the Middle East.
Next question is to Michael Del Rosso. Why was the movie used as an excuse for the Benghazi attack?
Okay, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is an organization of the 56 Islamic states in the world, plus the Palestinian Authority, at the head of state level, they issued they called for a program to eliminate Islamophobia in 10 years, okay? And basically, they coined the word Islamophobia. Basically, Islamophobia is if you slander Islam, right? If you hate Islam or any way, or realistically, if you say in Islamic law, if you're a non-Muslim and you say anything to put Islam at a disadvantage, or even anything true about it, such as I did about the jihad and everything, that's slander in their eyes, which is really not saying something that's true, saying something that's, I'm sorry, not saying something that's false, but saying something that's true. So they've been working this program for 10 years. That month in the General Assembly, the topic of discussion was international legislation pushed by the OIC to violate First Amendment rights in America and free speech rights in other countries to prevent anyone saying things derogatory to Islam, even doing something like holding the Texas Straw Jihad contest they had a few months ago, right? So this obscure movie comes out of nowhere, and it was propelled as the basis for an attack, and we see from newly released emails that the fabrication of this was a complete lie. They knew immediately that this was a real concentrated attack that was expected, and they tossed this thing out there, but it wasn't just anything. It was a narrative that actually served the purpose of the OIC and the Muslim Brotherhood in the General Assembly. And then later that day, I have the quote here from President Obama. Later that month, in September, he actually addressed the General Assembly in the whole context of this, and he said, "The future does not belong to those who slander Islam." I can't find it, but that was roughly what he said. So you had the U.S. ambassador, the UN ambassador was the one that went on all the talk shows to talk about the Benghazi attack, even though she had no responsibility in that region of the world. But what she did have a responsibility to was to repeat the story that look what happens when you let people say things that derogatory about Islam, we get dead ambassadors. And that was firmly being brought into the United Nations as part of a very sophisticated information operation to interfere with our First Amendment rights. At the OIC conference in Turkey, about a year earlier, Hillary Clinton even agreed that this is what they would do, is shame Americans and force Americans not to slander Islam. And she, when they greeted the survivors of these 4 dead Americans, they said, "Don't worry, we're going to get the guy that made that movie." And they did. Tossed him in prison, but they knew that it was all a lie. So it was really, it wasn't just any lie, it was a lie that was part of an enemy information operation in a time of war to suppress all of our First Amendment rights through international law in the General Assembly. So it's insidious what's going on. And in fact, Stephen Coughlin had been tracking this since 2005. The next day, he was on Glenn Beck talking about what I just told you. Because he's been very effective in actually predicting future enemy courses of action. And this was just another enemy course of action that he'd been waiting for and watched evolve over the years.
Let me add one thing here, which is sort of parallel to it. Okay, you hear me now? Yeah, good. Islam hasn't been reformed in over 1,300 years. The president of Egypt, al-Sisi, on 1 January of this year, charged all the leading Sunni clerics to reform Islam, bring it into the 21st century. I got to tell you, the worst 6 words George Bush ever uttered: Islam is a religion of peace. Amen. So, what's happened since al-Sisi made that call? Not one Western leader has come out in support. That's exactly what has to be done. And I might add to that, neither has the Pope. I mean, it's tragic that this has not been picked up. Ted Cruz has picked up on this, and several of the other candidates. But this is what must happen to Islam. We've got to bring it into the 21st century. And I always said, Islam is a political movement masquerading as a religion. And that's what it is.
Okay, this is for Mr. Del Rosso. Where can we find the PDFs you mentioned in your remarks?
I emailed them to Beth and other people, and you know how to communicate with her. Maybe the website or whatever, you can put them down for people to download and read. But they already have them in their email inbox. I sent it earlier this afternoon.
Okay, so Beth.
There's two PDFs I sent.
Okay, to Beth. Bethy, this is
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I think you were copied as well.
Okay, thanks. Early Christmas for me. I didn't even know. Okay, good. Here's two questions kind of back to back. Why do you think the media does not follow up, push, demand answers, and when they don't get truthful answers, then why don't they throw the political correctness flag? Are they scared? And in the same light, where was the president the night of Benghazi, and why is it that the media doesn't have a steady drumbeat of where was the president? No one seems to know. What do you think he was?
All right, I'm going to answer the first part of that question, and then I'll turn it over to the panel on the president. But, listening to the discussion of these gentlemen today, you all have to be asking yourself a greater fundamental question. Why is all of this happening? Is this about transforming America into an Islamic state? What is really going on? And I have to tell you this, having been on the inside of and having witnessed things that happened in Libya, things that I can't even discuss publicly, having been party to discussions with individuals on the inside of illegal financial transactions conducted by President Obama in 2009, 2010, signed off by Timothy Geithner, the then Secretary of Treasury, illegal financial transactions bailing out the European Union, using seed money from a gentleman, from a very evil individual named Hassan bin Laden, the half-brother of Osama bin Laden, and Hassan's son Mohammed bin Laden. This is a transaction called Clear Horizon. I'll make a copy of this document available to everyone. I'll get it to the Tea Party so it can be read, because in fact this transaction, which by the way is a party to a legal case in federal court in Texas, documents have been filed and accepted by the federal court where there are parties, plaintiffs and defendants. Hassan bin Laden, Mohammed bin Laden are defendants in this case, documenting exactly what happened. So why am I saying this? We don't have enough time to get into this transaction here today, but what it shows and what these gentlemen are talking about, these are manifestations of a much more serious situation facing not only America, but the world. And what is that? That situation can be understood if you do one simple thing: follow the money. Follow the money. And where is that going to lead you? When you follow the money, you're going to find that we are in the midst of a controlled economic collapse that is happening right now. We are in the midst of a controlled socio-political collapse of targeted nations, Libya being one of them, Syria being one of them. And I think America is one of them, because at the end of the day, the individuals who are behind all of this, the individuals who have bought our Congress, are responsible for what is happening, and America is the big prize that they must take down.
That's right.
And that's what we must wake up to. So who are these individuals? Again, follow the money. Go to the banks who own and control the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the European Central Bank, and you'll know who is responsible for all of this. So are the Muslim Brotherhood agenteurs operating to create and foment chaos, civil strife, destruction, fear on extreme levels? I say yes. Why would they do that? Because they want to bring about a one-world system under a one-world currency in which they control. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we're already living in it. The only thing they haven't done is collapse the currencies, do a global currency reset, and put us all under a one-world currency. That's the only thing that they're remaining to do. So we are fighting a very serious battle. And ultimately, some of you may disagree with this, but I believe it, reflecting deeply, having prayed on this deeply, but we are witnessing actions of the synagogue of Satan.
Yes.
And I think implicit in Stephanie's remark is the same people who are suppressing the news are bought and paid for by the same people who are controlling everything, which is why it's so important to use alternate ways to get our word out, which is where the thought came for the reasserting the Declaration of Independence, because there will be some, as you sign this, as it goes forth, that will basically attack this message by attacking you. And they will be attacking the person who's delivering it. I think you immediately deflect that and say, let's not talk about me, talk about the words. When you read it, it's fundamentally the words of the Founding Fathers. The grievances that are listed there are very similar to those that were listed against George III. So ask them exactly what it is that's in this document that they disagree with. And then I think people will begin to realize that this is what we're calling the systemic financial and political tyranny that is depriving us of our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. The only rumors that I've heard of what Obama was doing that night, I think some of you probably know that as well, he had somebody in there that with he and Biden were rehearsing for the debates. Remember, this was the big political season and all of that. And he wanted to go to bed early because he had to get up for a fundraiser trip to Nevada the next day. The word was, he was said, don't disturb me for anything. And he was just oblivious to the whole thing. It was not important to him. And he had not left. Just like any commanding officer, whether you're ashore or afloat, you have left standing orders that says if something happens, no matter when, you will wake me and get the skipper to the bridge. And so he didn't leave those orders, once again, showing that he was a totally ineffective leader.
Let me add one other thing, because I kind of left you hanging because I talked too damn long in the first place. But as I said in the beginning, this whole cover-up, it's more than just an operational screw-up. All of this that has gone on for 3 years now, and all of the false narrative and everything else. And when I was on the Lou Dobbs show, Lou asked me, he said, what do you think happened? I said, when I look at what went on in Benghazi, this to me has all the earmarks of an operation that went terribly wrong. When you look at self-preservation and everything else, what Stevens did in putting himself in that exposed position, I told Lou my position, if I had to speculate, I believe that Stevens was to be kidnapped, held hostage in exchange for the release of the blind sheikh. And of course, if you recall, Morsi, the president of Egypt, he campaigned on that pledge to get the blind sheikh released. And when he came to Washington that previous summer, before September, his #1 objective was to get the blind sheikh released. Nothing else really makes any sense to me. And I still maintain that position. And at the end of the day, when we do finally turn over that last page, hopefully we will get the true story.
And I just wanted to add a couple of things. One, the media is not reporting this because they're all guilty of professional malpractice, just like the majority of our members of the Senate and Congress. That's right. They know what the right thing to do is, they know what the truth is to report, and they don't follow it. And they'll blindly take, for instance, the Muslim Brotherhood entities will say so-and-so, and they'll just blindly report it instead of verifying the facts. Regarding Libya, Mubarak was forced out, and he's still alive. Gaddafi, now again, the Muslim Brotherhood is using American power to overthrow allied nations and put in their own jihadi, Sharia-controlled governments. So not only after 14 years in the anniversary of 9/11, not only did we spend trillions of dollars, precious, priceless blood, and lost the global war on terror, we're not done spending precious blood and treasure to further consolidate our enemies' victories. That's insane. That's the fault of Congress. It's the fault of the Republicans in Congress, because the Democrats in Congress and this administration are shameless. We can go criticize them all day long, say they did this and that, it's illegal, it's a crime. We've been putting these Republican majorities in because we expect them to make principled arguments, political arguments for impeachment, and to get rid of these people. And they're not doing it. They're complicit in this. And so, if you haven't, your ire should be focused on the GOP majority, and every one of you have congressmen and senators to go after. And the reason Gaddafi was killed, he was introducing a new currency called the African dinar. This is inside of Special Operations Command, inside of Washington, D.C., this is well recognized. They were worried that by him forcing, it was going to be backed by gold, he wanted gold for his oil, he was going to get Nigeria, he was going to try to get every country in Africa to accept that Nigeria is our 4th largest exporter of oil. That would have devastated the fiat Ponzi scheme paper currency that's the Federal Reserve note. And I can't blame him for that, but he had to be killed because that would have been very disruptive. The 2008 financial crisis, I was one of the guys that got the Pentagon's Irregular Warfare Support Group to kick off an analysis of it that led to a lot of evidence tracing it back to being a hostile financial attack, economic war attack, going back to Moscow. And that Kevin Freeman, I brought him into the Pentagon to do that report. He wrote 2 books on it, called A Secret Weapon and Game Plan. I think the report, which wasn't classified, but it was an internal work product for the Pentagon, was released. And we took Kevin and that report and socialized it to every agency in government, DIA, CIA, Treasury, State, you name it, FBI, saying here's now an official Pentagon report that says this was a deliberate attack, the dollar's at risk, we're doing quantitative easing, we're losing our credit rating. And they'd all go, that's really serious, but if you talk to state, that's not on my lane in the road. Well, that's really serious, but that's really something you should talk to the FBI about. So basically, every branch of government knows that the dollar is weak, that there's hostile nation states that want to see our economy collapse, and they all admit that they're not doing anything about it, and they don't know who should. That should worry everybody, because there's a progression of things coming in the next 12 months, the next 3 months, that every one of them is an indication and warning of further fragility of the dollar. Can you imagine if 50 million people with EBT cards cannot buy a loaf of bread?
And you know, look, Gaddafi was a dirtbag. If that would forestall a collapse of the dollar, that he had to be killed, maybe that's a rational choice to make. But they haven't done anything to strengthen the U.S. economy. They killed the Keystone Pipeline. They do everything they can to drive the price of energy up. The only reason gas is under $2 a gallon now is because of private entities and fracking.
My belief is that General Ham, command of African operations during the Benghazi event, was relieved of duty for trying to save our men. He refused the stand-down order. Can you provide any insight on this, and also add to this the relief of Rear Admiral Gouet?
Well, I think I got most of it. You know, I personally talked to General Ham, and I asked him about the 7 to 10 day advance warning. And he denied to me that he ever got an advance warning of an attack on our U.S. facilities in Benghazi. And, you know, he then told me, he said, really, I was more focused on Tunisia. And I said, okay, whoever the forces pre-positioned to respond to an action in Tunisia, because the last time I checked the chart, Tunisia borders Libya. So whatever's good for Tunisia, you could have used in Libya. None of that happened. I don't know what they're holding over General Ham's head, but clearly there were actions that should have been taken, but he was taken out of the operational chain 3 days after we commenced our bombing campaign in Libya. And NATO ran it from there. But he still had a responsibility, and he could have made recommendations. And as far as I know, he made none.
The other thing, with the way the combatant commands are lined up and the forces are divvied up, Africa Command was a command that was primarily set up to do what we call phase zero, peaceful stabilization type operations. There were no combat forces assigned to Africa Command. They were either assigned to European Command or to Central Command. A lot of the military people, even senior people, have been gagged on this because they've been told that this is classified. If you talk about it, you lose your pension, maybe go to jail. A lot of people talk privately about things, which is why it's so important for people who understand the military and maybe has some experience with this to speak out, because they're not being allowed to. I can say that when I was trying to work the truce, General Ham was not only supportive, he was waiting to try to get clear direction from the Pentagon as to what he was allowed to do. And when it came time to try to have a phone call to be able to talk about the terms of this truce, he still didn't have permission, but he was able to come up with what he found was kind of a loophole that allowed him to conduct these type of discussions. They went forward. As I told you, after we had everything kind of set, the deal was called off, and as Admiral Lyons mentioned, about 3 days later, he was relieved of the operational command of this, was turned over to NATO and to Admiral Stavridis, and he was out of the picture at that point. So it's hard to say, why he didn't do it, but it is something that he's probably gagged and can't talk about.
I think all evidence indicates that for sure General Ham, having wanted to proceed with the truce talks and was blocked from doing that, was removed at the time he was controlling the operation. As you all will remember, in late March, Stavridis of NATO goes before the Senate and says, "We have seen flickers of intelligence of Al-Qaeda in the rebel faction, but don't worry, people, nothing to see here. We're going to go forward with our humanitarian operation." I don't believe that General Ham would have ever said that, and I can tell you this, and the gentlemen in this podium here have all seen this document, that there exists an intelligence document that was provided to our intelligence agencies by Gaddafi and his generals that detailed the who, what, when, where, and why actionable intelligence of Al-Qaeda in the rebel faction. He provided the document to them at their request, and this was done within weeks of the revolution. They have this document in their hands, and I heard through some sources inside that that document was put raw on the desk of Obama in the White House. Nothing. Week later, Stavridis goes before the Senate. We've seen flickers of intelligence that Al-Qaeda is in the rebel faction, but again, people, nothing to see here. This is a humanitarian operation. This is what happened, and they went forward with this operation and their intention of regime change in Libya, and of course murdering Gaddafi. Gaddafi is a witness they just could not have around.
This is a very important fact to stay focused on, because it was after that intelligence document was produced that there was a meeting in the White House, after which the president signed what is called a decision directive authorizing, support to the rebel factions, knowing full well that they were infiltrated by Al-Qaeda. This is where, when he signs one of these, where he's compelled to notify the Gang of Eight, which was talked about earlier. And so one of three things happened. He either signed it and didn't notify anyone, and therefore he has not followed the law, or he did brief them, had someone brief them, but did it incomplete briefing, which makes the Gang of Eight unwitting accomplices, or he told them everything and they said, okay with us. We heard Senator McCain said, these guys are my heroes. And so there's a good chance that what happened there, that's a pivotal event that has got not only the executive branch, but the senior leadership of the Congress dirty on this whole thing. And if you do this under U.S. law, it's 10 years in prison. And so I think that's a lot of why we're seeing the suppression, the cover-up, because people are unwilling and unable to come forward and say that they knowingly, having strong intelligence, armed terrorists, and in fact switch sides in the war on terror.
And the law that Chuck is referencing here actually states that if you support or intend to support a terrorist organization, and at the time during the revolution, part of the rebels were made up of the Libya Islamic Fighting Group, which was on the U.S. terrorist organization list. If you do that, yes, it is jail time 10 to 15 years. Now, if an American dies as a consequence of your material support or even attempt to support a terrorist organization, it is life in prison. We have a law in the books that says this. So Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and you name it, members of Congress, should be facing life in prison.
That's right.
With the choice of whether they get yellow or orange jumpsuits.
Why did Ambassador Chris Stevens not have Marines guarding him? Why did he not have active duty Marines?
I'll take that.
Okay.
The Marines are actually assigned to embassies, believe it or not to guard the embassy staff or the ambassador. They are there to guard the security apparatus of an embassy and to be able to destroy that if that embassy is going to fall. The State Department has its own diplomatic security service that is charged with defending the embassy personnel. Now, in this case, there was, because it was in a hostile zone, there was a security detachment from the Department of Defense that was there, happened to be soldiers, could have been Marines for a special purpose. That was the group that was withdrawn. So what Chris Stevens was requesting is either to have them come back or to have his diplomatic security agents, additional numbers of them. Those were the guys that, even when the annex was attacked, they were still hiding in the closets over at the annex and didn't come to the aid of the guys who were up on the roof repelling the attack. They are kind of a quasi-military organization, but they are not Marines.
What organized groups do you consider to be the best ones to get involved with in order to change the train wreck that we are headed for? Do you have any suggestions?
Which groups, organized groups?
Okay, so in terms of organized groups, first of all, I'd like to say the First Coast Tea Party seems to be a pretty good organization to get involved with. Second of all, I truly believe that this reasserting the Declaration of Independence, being a peaceful, nonpartisan movement, is something that I hope you all take the time to go on to read and to sign if you feel empowered to do so, because our nation was founded by a thought process, by a dream, by a prayer of our forefathers seeking freedom and liberty for all. And they drafted on July 4, 1776, a Declaration of Independence from King Henry of England. The things that they said in the Declaration of Independence are very powerful and very meaningful even today. And if you will allow me, I'd just like to say a little brief quote from George Washington that I think embodies the very essence of the question and everything that we're talking about here. So is it a matter of joining organizations? That's a good thing. But we also can stand up and be counted with our voices. Right. George Washington said, "The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally staked on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. We, the people of the United States of America, must take back the destiny of our nation. It is in our hands." So, please, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, it doesn't matter. We are all Americans. In this nation, we must leave it free and peaceful for our children and our grandchildren. We owe that to them, and we owe it to all of the individuals, the men and women who have fought and died to preserve the liberty that we have right now that allows us to have this conversation. Let's not lose that.
Right.
When you're talking about organizations, you have to realize that the normal political organizations are just not working in this environment because of the corruption, of the leadership. Where I see people being effective are organizations like Judicial Watch that are able to go to the courts on civil matters, and in doing that, take depositions, do discovery to basically flush the people out that are basically covering up on the other side. So those type of organizations, there's also some talk about using qui tam lawsuits to be able to also get into the civil courts where they can't stop you there, particularly if you can find a federal judge who's going to give you a fair hearing. The other thing that we've talked about is that as this was being drafted, we realized that next 4th of July is the 240th anniversary of the signing of the original Declaration of Independence. In Egypt, in order to turn their country around, of the 85 million people there, they had 35 million come out, 22 million in Cairo alone. And what was unique about that demonstration in a Muslim country, about half of the people out there were women. Unprecedented, showing their force, but that was then empowered guys like El-Sisi to basically throw Morsi out. I don't think we're ever going to get to that point in our country by next year, but there is some talk about how do we get 20 million people into Washington, D.C. on the 4th of July, 2016, to reassert, their rights and to challenge the establishment of both parties. Can you imagine 22 million people ringing the White House, the entire mall, the whole way up to the Capitol and the Supreme Court, and don't even let those bastards go home, until they listen to us.
Got a question about the Iran deal. Why do you think Obama, the House, the Senate are so excited about this deal with Iran? And why did the USA get absolutely nothing from the deal?
Tell us what you think. Well, let me tell you. This is a total sellout. And of course, for Secretary Kerry, this is not the first time he's sold out his country. I gotta tell you, now, every one of our objectives, we conceded. But that was not enough. We also conceded our national honor. But that was not enough. We then proceeded to invent concessions. We were actually negotiating against ourselves. They came up with things it just was mind-boggling to me. We have agreed to show Iran how to protect their facilities against attack, sabotage, and cyber warfare. You can't make this stuff up. And you know who that was directed against. That was directed against Israel, any potential strike there. And of course, that was not enough. So then we went ahead and agreed to let the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, who has lied and cheated over the years in the development of their nuclear weapons program, let them inspect themselves. We took off the table all of the sensitive military sites, which we know they were conducting nuclear weapon, explosive tests, and so on, warhead development. And of course, here in all of this, that was not enough either. We removed sanctions that now permit Iran to obtain the most sophisticated conventional weapons, which jeopardizes our position in the Persian Gulf. And I have to tell you, even Jimmy Carter recognized that it was our vital interest to maintain our position in the Persian Gulf and keep those waterways open. But again, not enough. We then went ahead and we removed any restrictions on the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Now, there's only one reason you develop an intercontinental ballistic missile. And of course, it's very clear, death to America. So This is a tragedy. Now, right now, there is the congressionally mandated non-nuclear sanctions which must remain in effect. Furthermore, that 60-day clock that we're talking about really has not started, because the president hasn't met all the requirements of the Corker bill, regardless of what Corker says he did. He hasn't provided the secret annexes that were developed between the IAEA. And there's one last point. There's no signed agreement between the United States and Iran. So what are you voting on? Right. The only signed agreement at all is between the IAEA and Iran. There's no document. So this thing needs to be killed. Senator Ted Cruz came up with a movement which I thought was somewhat brilliant. And what it does, it goes after the CEO of the banking organizations, that if they release the funds, they are going to be liable to federal prosecution because they will be violating those congressionally mandated non-nuclear sanctions. And this may throw a little roadblock in their way.
I want to point out too, this, and I say this factually and literally, you basically have a Marxist regime deconstructing America in the White House. I mean, by the textbook definitions of what their political philosophy is. It's not the American political philosophy. And because of that, and because of the association with our enemies, Iran and North Korea are emerging nuclear threats because Russia and China want them to be. Everything that this administration does, from before 2008 elections, even undermining the Bush administration, to the fact that they have permitted this sell of a deal that benefits Russia and the complete destabilization of the Middle East. I participated in the Congressional EMP Commission for studying the threat of positive nuclear electromagnetic pulse. We had evidence of Iranian doctrine that says their preferred use of a nuclear weapon is an EMP attack against America. They could nuke a half dozen cities, it would be tragic, but it would just tick us off. If an EMP attack, you might not even see it coming. We don't even have radar that looks south. You could launch a missile off a tub in the Gulf of Mexico and you wouldn't see it. B, we had testimony from Soviet flag officers that they proliferated the design of super EMP weapons to North Korea and Iran. And 3, we saw fatwas that said that it was permissible to use nuclear weapons. These are Shia fatwas. And then 4, there's a Sunni book written by Pakistani Brigadier General H.K. Malik called The Quranic Concept of War. And in a chapter on strategy, it says that the objective of the Quranic concept of war is to instill terror in your enemies, the infidels, and using nuclear weapons is perfectly permissible in Islamic law to do that with. Those facts alone should make a preemptive strike against Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon. And yet knowing all these facts, this is the continuing story. The failures of the national government that led to these 4 deaths, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the failures that could lead to millions of American deaths. And it's absolute malpractice at the highest level of the Republicans and Democrats that let this take place.
Stephanie, will you talk about the money deal, please?
Hi, Jay.
Hey, between Iran and
Yeah. Really, I think, Jay, you should come on up and talk about this. Jay's a financial planner, money expert, and he actually alerted me on what I'm going to say, what he alluded to, which goes into why this deal is happening with Iran. Seems pretty shocking, pretty counterintuitive to our national security policy. Well, Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, came out recently, not too long ago, and publicly announced that there's a need for a global currency reset that she said should happen this October. And a part of this will be the restructuring of what they call special drawing rights, SDRs. And what they plan to do is restructure the debt of all nations take maybe 10% out of our bank accounts to force citizens of different nations to pay their debt down, kind of like what happened in Cyprus. They'll just take it. And of course decide the fate of nations. But here's what's interesting. Christine Lagarde said, and you can get this on YouTube, in order for us to do the global currency reset, the deal must be struck with Iran. Follow the money, people. Follow the money. Now, I want to say this really quick. As you follow the money, one of the things that you're going to see here, before 9/11/2001, the sovereign banks, the sovereign central banks of the world, not under the control of the banking cartel, included the following nations: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Libya, Cuba, North Korea, Iran. By 2003, Afghanistan and Iraq were under the control of the banking cartel. Now keep in mind, these are American and European private individuals. By the fall of 2011, coming up here shortly, Obama intends to establish a deal with Cuba on his own in violation of US law to allow banks to deal financially with Cuba. So check Cuba. Now their biggest prize? Iran. Follow the money.
If you're also looking for motivation, what's behind this, you turn it around and don't think of President Obama as an ineffective, incompetent leader. Think of him as somebody who's doctrinaire, one of the most conniving, smartest leaders we've ever seen. He's just leading us in a different direction. And in his world, having a reestablishment of, call it the Caliphate, call it the Persian Empire, is a good thing. And so if you look at everything that he did, after he gave his speech, the first group that was going to riot, was the Green Movement in Iran. Now, when that happened, the young people were rising up against the aged Ayatollahs. Our strategy, unspoken throughout the entire Afghan and Iraq war, was to contain Iran. If you were to have looked at the classified war plans for an attack into Iran, particularly a land campaign, it is difficult. And so the idea was contain them, take down take down Afghanistan. Look at where we built bases in Afghanistan. Take down, Iraq, get them to be kind of our friends, squeeze Iran with sanctions until the young people rise up and throw off these old 80-year-old, Ayatollahs. And that was looked at as being a reasonable strategy. When that actually started to happen, Obama turned his back on it, yet he was all over the uprisings in Egypt and other places. The reason is that he had to have believed that it's better to have the Ayatollahs in charge, people he could, quote, deal with. You also look at Iran, although they have a very highly educated group of people, there are very few people there, men that are my age. They've all been killed off during the Iran-Iraq war. You had this next group, what we would call the Gen Xers, who basically gave it their shot and they were pushed aside. The next group that's coming up, their version of the millennials, have all been educated into their Islamic philosophy. So it's going to be very, very difficult now to have Iran implode. And if you take the pressure off of them, then they can go spread. And you almost have to believe that that's what Obama wants to have happen. Now, I've heard pundits say the reason we have to go forward with this deal is that even if we try to keep sanctions on, our European allies are going to take them off. And so therefore we should get on board and at least try to make these inspections work. Well, that sounds to me like our allies have now decided to side with our enemy, and they have switched sides, as well. And why we can't stand up to them and say, listen, if you do this, you're on your own. When these guys start coming across your borders. And oh, by the way, if we're doing this so that we can take what is a 2-month breakout time on establishing a nuclear weapon and stretching it to a year, What's to say that 2 months after they sign this agreement, they get their $150 billion, they still have a nuke, but they've got $150 billion to buy their ICBM. So the whole thing doesn't make sense any way you look at it. The only way it makes sense to me is this is what Obama wants to happen.
Okay, one final question.
Let me just add, you know, I don't think Obama's that smart. You know, I mean, this brilliant guy, you can't even find out his grades in high school. You know, we should be thankful that he's fundamentally lazy. And I want to know who's the one pulling the puppet strings.
George Soros.
Because that's who we have to make.
Okay, one final question. Question is, those that are active duty military who have figured it out like you have figured it out, why do they not stand up and do anything? Or can they do anything? And if they can't, when they get out of active duty, why don't they get together and stand up like you guys are?
I'll tell you, one of the reasons why, you know, from the very beginning I chose to start talking about this is that it is very difficult, if impossible, for these folks to talk while they're on active duty, because everything that, when I give them information and I'm transmitting it, I don't have a security clearance, that's not classified. When they receive it, it can become classified. And so a lot of people who know a lot of what happened are still on active duty. They've been gagged, they've been threatened with their pensions, they've been, you know, threatened with, maybe even, you know, being put up on charges. That's not really an excuse, but it kind of explains what's happening. What people have been doing is talking, but talking quietly, you know, validating things that I've heard, and some of them are going to be willing to speak out if they can get immunity, but there is a lot of people who know what's happening. They have just been gagged, just like they've gagged Katala by putting him, you know, under investigation and prosecution. They have gagged all these people. So the only people who can speak out are people like us at this point.
Well, let me expand on that a little bit. You know, you take an oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And what our military leadership has done in a number of cases, they've succumbed to political correctness. Their position became more sacred than their oath of office. I mean, you know, how we could we have a serious national security problem. I can't emphasize it enough. They stood by and let this unilateral destruction of our military take place. Nobody stood up. There's only one guy who stood up on the social engineering, Peter Pace, when he was asked offline what he thought about the removal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and he said it's immoral, and he got canned. Essentially, he was told to put in his papers. But at least he can stand up and look at himself in the mirror and say, I stated what my belief is. And I got to tell you, this social engineering was designed to undercut the warrior capabilities of our military.
Yes, sir.
You know, there were three things I never let on a ship. One was a thief, two was a drug user, a drug pusher, and three was a homosexual. If you fell into those three categories, you were dead. And let me tell you, I didn't even get to the transgender crap. This makes absolutely no sense. But again, if you want to take down the military, undercut the military to promote your socialist agenda, this is what you do.
I just want to offer a little bit of a story, just real quick. In August 2012, Chuck and I were in Washington attending a private dinner, not a large group, and we were talking to General Petraeus, who was the then director of the CIA, and communicating with him about a number of subjects and concerns that we had about the influence of private individuals in the financial system of our nation and the world. And General Petraeus, it was very interesting. He said to us, you know, it's interesting that you bring that up, because when I left the military and had agreed to be the director of the CIA, accept that appointment, I was called to New York City for a private dinner. And in the room were a dozen of the most rich men in the world. The richest men in the world sat in that room and had me for dinner. And Petraeus is telling the story like, I couldn't believe it. Why me? Why did they have me over for dinner? It was unbelievable. They are the richest men in the world. They control everything, and they wanted me to come for dinner. And I said to him, well, sir, what did they want? He said, well, I don't really know, but they want to get to know me. And I said, well, sir, be careful, because what they want is your soul. I'll tell you, that's what they want. Now, Libya happened about a month later than that, and I firmly believe, and I am sure Chuck would feel the same way, that General Petraeus, director of the CIA, was probably going to come out and talk about how the talking points were changed, about the things that were going on that led to this tragedy that should never have happened. And what did they do to him? Boy, did they send a message to anybody out there who would pose a threat against their actions. They crucified him. And now look at Hillary Clinton. All of the illegal things that she's done. But no, it's okay. You know, she's a grandmother. She's running for president of the United States. She shouldn't even have a security clearance. She should be stripped of that. And I also believe that Barack Obama should be stripped of the Nobel Peace Prize, which he should never have won in the first place.
Okay, I'll give my 2 cents there about the question on what organizations that you can kind of join or listen to. Is what I'm going to point out is I want to make a case again for Anthony Pinoso, American Foreign Policy, that is on Sunday, 4 to 5. If you want to hear the same context of what we're talking about this evening, that's what we talk about. That's what he brings on his show. Also, We the People on Saturday. When is it? Saturday? Saturday at 1 o'clock, We the People. 2 o'clock, thank you. West Ponce, appreciate that. Saturday, We the People, 2 o'clock, 2 to 3 p.m. on Saturday. Tune in. That's on AM 600, WBOB, or 100.3. Tune in and you will hear the exact same things that we're talking about. We bring other folks on to talk about the same things. Get smart, get educated, get informed, and get going. This country needs us. Sign the Declaration of Independence, reassertion. God bless all of you. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.